Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlickers, shills, desolators, serfs, peasants, vassals, minions, meat sacks. I'm Useful Idiot. Welcome. And this is my fourth and final installment of this short series I'm doing on military waste and this relationship between the government and the military-industrial complex and this juxtaposition of private contractors, privates, the so-called private military security industry, and the United States government. So anyway, this final one is going to be just kind of recent stories that show that in spite of 100 years or more of private corporations in the military-industrial complex defrauding the government, it continues to go on and on and on. And these stories I'm going to point out are very good examples of exactly that. The first one is one that came out just a month or so ago, and a partial Pentagon in it. Let me remind you once again that there are so few requirements of audit on the military that for all practical purposes it's never really been done. So we've been getting these partial audits of certain departments and certain developments, so we have some idea of what's going on. And whenever we do find out, it's always pretty shocking. And this is a good example. Documentation for the year-end Army fund adjustments. The amount that can't be found is $6.5 trillion that can't be accounted for. So what other corporation, what other government department, what other entity on earth could find out that they have $6.5 trillion missing? And not only has it not been a big story, there hasn't been any outcry, there hasn't been any discussion of it in congressional hearings. It just is a non-story. And this is from July 2016. The Defense Finance and Accounting Service said there's just lack of documentation, and that 16,000 files just vanished, and that they have $6.5 trillion that cannot be accounted for. I could have eliminated all the videos that I've just done about government and military waste, and just did a video right now and said that they can't find $6.5 trillion. And that's all I'd need to say really about the nature of military and government waste when it comes to the military. Apparently the staff would just plug in fake numbers a lot of times in order just to make things gel. And then another story that just came out from 2006 to 2009 from a source called Armor Source, said that the United States government paid $30 million for 126,000 helmets that were made with prison labor. And all of those helmets were recalled, and the government just flushed $30 million down the toilet. So first of all, once again, it's interesting that $30 million just out of the blue gets flushed down the toilet, and it's just really a non-issue. But that's a lot of money for a lot of different things on planet Earth, other than getting poorly made helmets from prison labor and then just flushing it down the toilet. Let alone the fact that now we have prison labor. And also I understand that Chinese are also contracted to make military uniforms and helmets and the like for the U.S. military. How strange is that? But you know, just the fact that we got prison labor doing it is also rather dubious. But then we have another story that came out the last couple months too, about more waste, just your garden variety waste that we're all numb to now and get used to. And that's $150 million being spent on private villas for U.S. personnel in Afghanistan. So of course a lot of things aren't necessarily fraud, they're just hubris. $2.7 billion on a surveillance balloon that doesn't work. And so there, once again, there's another number, $2.7 billion that can be flushed. What other industry, what other business, what other entity can just flush $2.7 billion? Take one of the banks, for example, one of the too big to fail banks on Wall Street. $2.7 billion would be a huge hit for them, but when you have a contract between the military and the government, $2.7 billion is the blink of an eye and gets flushed down the toilet. $500 helicopter gears that we're paying $8,000 for. So there's that ghost, the $800 hammers from 20 and 30 years ago, and we're still seeing the same thing, $500 helicopter gears for $8,000, and billions of weapons components that will never be used. And that's a good one that doesn't get discussed very much either, the fact that we have billions of dollars that are taxpayer money, government transfers to the military-industrial complex for all these weapon systems and components and replacement parts and backups that will never, ever be used. And so that's a great cash cow for the military-industrial complex. And then last but not least, the last story I'm going to finish up with here is a good one, and a real doozy. 2015 report that said that a small handful of federal contractors are responsible for $92 billion in fines, settlements, and judgments since 1995. So that gives you a good example of the level of fraud, and that's just the level of fraud that the government has declared as prosecuted, and then these fines that have added up to $92 billion since 1995, and no surprise, it's just a handful of the usual federal contractors, and some of these companies obviously are also the biggest lobbyists. But 60 examples of Boeing committing fraud or violating the law. Lockheed Martin, 79 examples of fraud or violating the law. General Electric, 59 instances of fraud or violating the law. And then it also includes all sorts of other companies too: ExxonMobil, GlaxoSmithKline, BP, Honeywell, FedEx, Chevron, Royal Dutch. All multiple counts, dozens and dozens of counts of fraud and violating the law. But I'm focusing in on military-industrial complex, although that does show a good example of the fact that it's a corporate phenomenon. It's not necessarily just the military-industrial complex. Of course, all corporations defraud the government, pad their billing, and charge exorbitant prices for any kind of services or products. And just like all the other corporate arenas, there's a less than 7% chance of a criminal prosecution happening. So once again, they know nothing's going to happen to them. They're hardly ever prosecuted, so why change anything? So once again, it goes back to the basic premise I have, that it's an understanding. It's almost the same kind of understanding that the U.S. government has with the banks, that these fines the government metes out are just smoke and mirrors for the masses, and they're paltry sums compared to how much these companies make off these criminal acts. But anyway, it's just this game they play. And the same thing with the military-industrial complex. The fact is that the military-industrial complex and all these security industry that service these government contracts, and all these private contractors that work for the U.S. government all over the world are paid top dollar, and the government gets dubious results, but that's the price they pay for privatization. And there you have it. Part 4 in the series about military waste. Like I say, just an understanding of cost of doing business, and apparently it will never stop as long as there are incentives, a lot more incentives to continue doing so than there are to stop. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.